I'm going to go ahead and go to some of your homework problems. So I like to always try to do some of these together. So here's number 5. It says, calculate the distance between the points P, which is -1, 1, and K, which is 6, -2 in the coordinate plane. Give the exact answer, not a decimal. Okay, so this is just like your homework on that you'll have for number 5, but it'll be with different numbers. So first, I want to remind you of the distance formula that I had you write down. Distance is equal to the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared.
And it does have to be in that order, like x2 minus.
So it depends on how you want to write the ordered pair. You get to choose which ordered pair you put in to it, as long as whichever. So like if you start with x2 here, so let's just label our order pair. So x1, y1, x2, y2. So if I decide to start with x2, which is 6, here, I have to make sure that the y2 goes in there. But if I wanted to, I could actually do the -1, 1. That order doesn't matter. You could do x1 minus x2, y1 minus y2, or you can do x2 minus x1, y2 minus y1. That part is arbitrary. As long as you're putting it, you're making sure it lines up correctly when you subtract.
Either way, yeah, it still has to go in the right order that way.
Yes, because otherwise you're doing like you're finding something different. Yeah. So this is just a formula, right? So we're just going to plug this in. So the distance is equal to the square root of, all right, my x2 is 6. My x1 is -1. And then I'm going to square that plus, so I'm just going to write the whole thing out first. y2, which is -2, and then y1, which is 1. Okay, so this is me just plugging it into a formula. And I have to watch my signs because it's really easy to make a mistake on the signs. Are there any questions about what I've done so far before I actually work it out? Now, if I were you, personally, this is what I would do. I would just go ahead and take this part, like we did with the quadratic formula, go ahead and find that special number for me. That's what I would do every time. So I want to give you a moment to get.
It's a big equation depending.
Oh yeah, it's okay. Yeah, 58. And remember, you don't type in the square root, just type in that other part.
Oh, okay.
You just like with the quadratic formula. We just want to do that inside part to see what we're dealing with. And make sure when you do the minus negative, you do a minus and a negative. Now, if you were going to do this by, so I can't factor 58, so I just get the square root of 58. If it asked me for the decimal, I would type in the square root of 58 into my calculator, which is about 7.615. And that's the distance between P and K. So it would be approximately 7.6. But because it's asking me for the exact answer, I have to do the square root of 58. All right, I want to give you a moment to please try number 6. It's the same problem, different numbers. And I'm going to show my work quietly while you try it on your paper. I'm going to find this special number first to kind of see what I'm dealing with. And I would use a calculator for that because when I do it by hand, sometimes I make a little mistake. Okay, so I used a calculator and I got 80. Did you guys get 80? Awesome. Okay, so I get 80. Now, if I did that by hand, it would be -8 squared, which is 64 plus 16. Okay, so either way, I end up with the square root of 80. Now, I can simplify the square root of 80, but I'm not going to do that. Do you know why? Because it asks me to round my answer to the nearest 100. That is going to be 2 decimal places. So this is when I actually have to have a calculator for this problem. Now I'm going to ask you to type in the square root of 80, which you could have typed in the whole thing since it was asking you for an approximation anyways, but it's good practice to find that number first. So for the square root of 80, did you get about 8.944? Something? Okay, so the nearest hundredth is 2 decimal places, so this will be approximately 8.94. And if we had a ruler and we had graph paper and like a really nice ruler, we could actually measure this distance and it would be about 8.94 units of a distance between each other. All right, are there any questions on the distance formula? I wanted to make sure we did some of those together since you're going to have that on your homework. All right, so let's do one. We'll do one midpoint, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the x and y intercepts algebraically, and then you're going to have some time to actually work on that first homework assignment. All right, so let's try the midpoint formula here. So it says find the midpoint of the segment joining the points S, which is 7, -5, and T, which is -1, 3. Now remember, this is just a formula. So the midpoint formula says that if you have 2 ordered pairs and you want to find the middle of the 2 ordered pairs, it's a very basic formula. You're going to add your x's together and divide by 2. You're going to add your y's together and divide by 2. So I'm going to have 7 plus -1 divided by 2, and then -5 plus 3, excuse me, divided by 2. And then from here, I'm just calculating each one separately. And if you have the fraction key in your calculator, that can be very useful because you can just type it in. So let's see, what did you get for the x coordinates? Number 7.
So, do you multiply these or you add, or that's,
So it's 7 plus -1 over 2.
oh, okay, and then that'll be 1.
That'll be the x coordinate, yeah. So I think that's like 3, right? Because that would be 7 plus -1 would be 6, divided by 2 is 3. And then for my second one, it's -5 plus 3, which would be -2. -2 divided by 2 is -1. So I end up with 3, -1. Let me show you what that means graphically. So if you go to your graph, that would mean at 3, -1, which would be probably about right here, would be the middle of that segment. So you're just finding the middle of the segment. So you add the x's together, divide by 2, add the y's together, divide by 2. When I add the x's together and divide by 2, that gives me the x coordinate. When I add the y's together and divide by 2, that's going to give me the y coordinate. Now, this section has quite a few objectives because it's the first section of a new chapter. So you'll have to bear with me because we are now going to kind of switch gears back to the x and y intercepts. So they want you to be able to look at a graph and say, that's the x and y intercept. And we've already done that, right? So where does it cross the x-axis? Where does it cross the y-axis? But we're also going to be given equations, and algebraically, we're forced to find it as well. But are there any questions on the midpoint before I move on to that part? You guys are good? Okay, and we'll have a warm-up that goes over midpoint and distance tomorrow, for sure. Okay, so let's take a look at number 8. We're going to do 2 more together, and then we'll have a little break, and then you can start actually working on this assignment, because the best time to do it is right after you learn it. And we're now moving into, like I said, our traditional homework and tests and things like that. Okay, so to find the x-intercept and y-intercepts of the graphs of the following. We're going to start with the x-intercept. And I'm going to give you a thing that will always work, no matter what class you're in. To find the x-intercept anytime, all you have to do is plug y equals 0 into the equation and solve for x. The reason why this works is because if you remember, the x-intercept is always going to be x comma 0. So it makes sense that we can plug 0 in for y and figure out what that x value is. And so we're going to take our equation here, which is x squared plus y equals 4. And we're going to plug 0 in for y. So this y right here, I'm about to place with a 0. And I'm going to solve. So I get x squared plus 0 equals 4. And then x squared plus 0 is just, you know, like the 0 is basically gone. So I get x squared equals 4. And then to solve this, how do you think I could undo a square root? A square. I accidentally said it. You'll take the square root of both sides. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I'm going to take the square root of both sides. And I end up, and oh, by the way, when you take the square root of both sides, you always have to put a plus or minus. Because if you think about, if I said, what squared is equal to 4, it would be 2 and negative 2. Both of those would be true. So anytime we take the square root of both sides, we always have to include a plus or minus, which I tried to do right here. I'm going to clean this up a little bit, though, so you can see it a little better. So let me backtrack, because that might be something you haven't seen in a while. So I'm going to do, I have x squared equals 4. To solve it, the opposite of something squared is the square root. So I take the square root of both sides. I don't forget the plus or minus, because there are two answers that would make that true. Positive 2 and negative 2. And the square root of 4 is 2. That's how I find it. So this would be x equals negative 2 and positive 2. Now on this question, it says you can separate them with commas. And I noticed on the key, it actually left it. It's kind of interesting that it left it as negative 2 and 2, because usually they make you write it as an ordered pair. But it's not telling you write it as an ordered pair, so you can actually keep it like this. And I'm going to show you that I've attached the key to your homework. You're going to have different problems anyways. But that way you can see the entry part of how they want you to write stuff. Okay, so that was the x-intercept. Now we're going to do the y-intercept. How do you think, algebraically, we're going to do the y-intercept?
Plug 0 into x.
Good. We're going to plug 0, or x equals 0 in to the equation. Absolutely. That will work all the time. Every time you're trying to find the y-intercept, you can always do this. And then you'll solve for x. I'm sorry, solve for y. So I'm going to have 0 squared plus y equals 4. Well, 0 squared is just 0, so this one's really easy. I just end up with y equals 4, and that would be considered my y-intercept. So my x-intercepts are negative 2, 2. My y-intercept is 4. And if you take a look to the second to last page, you can see how I printed out the answers. Like I said, especially in the first few assignments, I like to do that so you can see how they want you to enter in the answers. All right, we're going to do one more. And this one is a little different. We're going to do the number, hold on, it's coming. Where is it? There it is. Okay, we're going to do number 17. We're going to find the x and y intercepts for same idea of what we just did, but now it's a linear equation. So I want to show you what that looks like. And I want you to note that it says to write each intercept as an ordered pair. If there is more than one intercept, use the AND button. Select none if applicable. Okay, so I'm going to start with the x-intercept, and we're going to follow that same rule. To find the x-intercept, which is always x comma 0, we're going to plug y equals 0 in and solve for x. So I'm going to have negative 9x minus 9 times 0 equals 81. So all I'm doing is replacing the y with a 0. And then I'm going to solve. So when I do negative 9 times 0, this just becomes 0, and I end up with negative 9x is equal to 81. Remember, anything times 0 is 0. Since it's negative 9 times x, I can just divide both sides by negative 9, and I end up with x equals negative 9. But it does ask me to write it as an ordered pair. So my x-intercept, my answer would be negative 9 comma 0. Now I want to give you a moment to try to find the y-intercept by plugging 0 in for x. My y-intercept, which is 0 comma y, I'm going to plug 0 in for x and solve for y. Once again, anything times 0 is 0, kind of goes away. You can almost do this in your head, but I like to show my work. And then negative 9 times y equals 81. I divide both sides by negative 9, and I end up with y equals negative 9. However, I can't just type negative 9 in because it's asking me to write each intercept as an ordered pair. So how would I write that?
0, negative 9.
Good. Very picky. Okay. Now,